Hi there. Welcome to another one of my Own Your Expertise interviews. I'm Emily Crookston, owner and decider of all things at the Pocket PhD. I'm the ghostwriter for Rebels, Renegades, and Mavericks, and I love helping experts with big ideas get those ideas out of their heads and into the hands of their fans. Today, I'm sitting down with Julia Wuench. Julia is the founder and CEO of the Authenticity Guide, which is a career coaching company. And I just love watching how Julia has grown her company without fear and with authenticity. Julia, thank you for joining me. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about who you work with and what you do?
Yes, thank you for that. So, as you mentioned, I am a career confidence coach and the founder of the Authenticity Guide. And so, I work with emerging leaders to help them with things like boosting their confidence, getting unstuck when they feel stuck, navigating corporate environments with poise and confidence. I help people with authentic networking, communicating your values. So kind of all things authenticity, all things getting closer to your authentic you in your career, which is something that a lot of people sort of wake up one day and feel they haven't quite pursued. Often people feel this disconnect between who I am authentically and what my values are and what drives me and what moves me and what I do for money. And so I help people sort of bridge that gap in their careers.
So I'm curious how, like an individual, they maybe suddenly find themselves in a middle management position. Maybe they hadn't really thought through how they would be a good leader, or maybe they haven't thought through like, okay, what's the next step after this, right?
Right.
And so you help them kind of figure that out.
What's the catalyst for hiring someone like me for coaching? And so people come to me with lots of different concerns. Sometimes it's something as simple as I feel like I haven't been intentional about mapping a career trajectory. Will you
Mm.
help me do that? Whether it's at this company that I'm at or at a different company, how do I articulate my values? I've never done that. How do I talk about my narrative, right? Like what is my
Mm.
cohesive story as I'm networking? How can I develop that? How can I build my life holistically, including but also outside of work to
Mm.
encompass my values, right? So maybe that looks like thinking about volunteer engagements or board seats, or an investment strategy that's consistent with your values, right? And so I would say it's a kind of career confidence coaching with a life coaching flavor.
I think that makes a lot of sense because I could see people getting into corporate and finding their dream job out of college and just, climbing the ladder and working their way up and then suddenly looking around and saying, "Wait, is this what, is this really what I want?"
Yeah,
And right, how do I navigate, do I want to stay at this company? Like what does the next 5-year plan look like, right? Maybe they're following the 5-year plan they had when they were 20 and now
yeah,
they're like looking for the next 5-year plan or 10.
right, exactly. Gotta like recalibrate. Are these still
Right.
my values? Is this still what that word success means to me, right? Like
Yeah.
am I following kind of my early 20s idea of what was impressive? And now my values have shifted, and what I think is impressive has shifted, and I want to kind of confront that.
I love it. Okay, cool.
Oh,
So let's see. What is your die in a ditch belief? So for my audience, I always like to ask my interviewees about their die in a ditch belief. And it's basically a belief that you could defend if you were pressed. It might be slightly controversial, but it's a thing that draws a line in the sand for you.
one of my answers was that it's still not equitable to be a woman in the workplace.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
And so I hope that's not terribly controversial, but I
Right.
see it really intimately with the people I coach, right? So with sort of the biological realities of being a woman, whether it's having children or making different choices, women aren't rewarded for mothering responsibilities at work. I think companies really struggle when it comes to retention and motherhood. That's a huge issue that I think we need to like have a huge discussion about.
It's interesting, especially when we think about the pandemic and how it's exacerbated this problem, right? Like, there was just the story recently about how LinkedIn has added stay-at-home mom as one of the options when you're choosing your career, when you're setting up your profile.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, something. I think I agree with you. Like, it needs to be a conversation. How do we support women in the workplace, and, companies, I think, that are better at retaining women are more successful. Overall, they're more profitable. Like, there's all these stats out there. It's like amazing that it's not a question, and it's amazing that it hasn't been a conversation. So I'm always thinking, like, maybe the pandemic maybe this is one of those changes that it's gonna bring about. It's going to increase the conversation around this issue. Your second die in a ditch belief was that we tie work to our identity far too much in this country, which is also an interesting belief to talk about.
Yeah. So think about going to a dinner party and the first question you get asked, it's never, what do you do for fun, or what's most important to your identity? It's, what do you do?
Right.
What do you do? And because of that, I mean, that's a symptom of, I think, the root cause, which is we are our identity. And there's parts of the country that you feel this more. I think the coasts probably areas of innovation, definitely the case. And I think that trickles down to the individual level, and we tie our job to our worth. And that's something that clients come to me a lot with, and needing to disentangle their identity from their jobs. And it really is disentangling, because it's very entangled, it's very complicated, and it starts from a very young age.
It feels like, we talk about work-life balance all the time, but it's almost like this is actually the core issue. Like, we first need to disentangle our identities from our work before we can even talk about what work-life balance might look like.
Beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. That is sort of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, that's the base work, right? Is, if you are your job, how will you disconnect from it? You can't just tell people, like, log off at 5. Like, that's not gonna work.
Right.
Yeah. So what is your relationship to your work and your identity and your ego, and what are the implications of that?
What would you say has helped you the most in learning to own your expertise?
I write and I read a lot. So I'm continually in the process of educating myself through my clients and through what I read and through what I research for my writing. And so I think once you've put in the time and the hours, and you can sort of predict what people sort of presenting issues are going to be and why and how to help them, then it stands to reason that you're probably an expert in that area. And so it's come with time, and it's come with experience, and it's come with continued learning and research.
So yeah, and it's really interesting, because I think the writing aspect of learning, I think people miss that a lot. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about as a writer, how much, I'll come to write a blog, or I'll come to write an article with, a vague idea of where I want to go. And I'll be like, oh, I can't figure out the idea. And then once I start writing, it's like magic. And like, these issues that have been blocking me from starting, like, work themselves out in the word flow. So yeah. I appreciate that aspect of it, especially. If you could go back in time and mentor your 20-year-old past self, what advice would you give to her?
First of all, I would give her, like, just the biggest hug.
Yeah.
Because she was so stressed out.
Right.
And I would just say, it's so simple and it's so cliche, but it's quite profound for me. And it would be, it will work out. It will all work out. And I think there was so much fear there for me. And I think there's so much fear there for younger professionals who I coach, right? Like, the what ifs, like, what if I get stuck? What if I never get a job? What if I never meet my person? What, like, right? And so if you can live your life having the faith that if you try and you move in the right direction, it will work out. And in retrospect, it will be a beautiful story. You just can't see the story right now.
So I think we've had a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Julia.
Thank you for having me, Emily.
Of course. Yeah. Tell everybody where they can find out more about you if they're curious.
Yeah, so go to my website. It's theauthenticityguide.com. All of my contact info is on there, info about my coaching. I have an incredible team, so big shout out to my team. And so you can find out everything about me and them and more on my website. And I hope to connect with some of your listeners after this.